The reading room was silent, eerily so. Walls lined with ancient volumes from nearly every belief system known to man loomed over a single figure. Mr. Bernard sat alone, sunk into his leather chair. At 78, his once jet black hair had turned to pure white, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. It was the gaze of a man who had fought thousands of intellectual battles, each one sharpening his mind like a blade. He had everything: wealth, fame, a reputation as the world's most feared atheist debater. From the Bible to the Vedas, from the Torah to Taoist scriptures, Bernard had studied them all. Not to believe, but to challenge. To dissect. To destroy. He had never hated religion. In fact, he approached it with great curiosity and discipline. He had prayed with monks in the Himalayas, debated Christian bishops in the Vatican, sat with rabbis in Jerusalem. And yet, the more he learned, the more he became convinced that religion was nothing more than beautifully decorated fiction, cloaked in emotion, empty of logic. If God exists, he had once declared at Princeton University, then let him defend himself. Logic should not be afraid of challenge. Why then does every religion tremble when faced with real questions? For over 6 decades, Bernard had left audiences speechless and opponents in tears. Young atheists saw him as an icon, the man who silenced God. He refuted miracles, questioned divine morality, and mocked the concept of paradise and punishment. Yet despite all the applause, Bernard was not at peace. Every night, standing in front of the mirror, he would stare at his own reflection and whisper, "If God doesn't exist, then why am I still searching for him?" In truth, he hadn't stopped searching. He had simply hidden his desperation beneath layers of logic and pride. But there was one religion he had not dared to challenge publicly: Islam. He found it too abstract. A God you can't see, can't imagine, can't even define? That's not theology, that's evasion. He scoffed during a closed-door academic meeting. If this God is real, let him face my questions. Then, one cold morning, Mr. Bernard made a shocking announcement. I will host one final debate. One last challenge. Anyone, philosopher, priest, imam, monk, scholar, or scientist, who can prove to me that the God of Islam exists, using only logic and knowledge, will receive my entire fortune. The academic world erupted in chaos. News headlines ran wild. Debate clubs, religious institutes, and talk shows speculated endlessly. Some believed Bernard had finally lost his mind. Others believed it was a trap. But one thing was certain: this would be the most anticipated debate of the century. Scholars were hesitant. Who would willingly walk into the intellectual lion's den of Bernard's mind? After 60 years of dismantling belief, who could stand up to him now? But fate, as it often does, had its own plans. The auditorium at the St. Louis Debate Center was packed on the night of the event. Scholars from Yale, Harvard, Al-Azhar, Oxford, and beyond filled the room. TV crews, journalists, theologians, and even curious students held their breath. The massive stage stood under blinding lights. At its center, Mr. Bernard. He stood tall, dressed in his signature black robe. His cane, made from polished oak, clicked softly as he walked to the podium. Cameras flashed. The room buzzed. Then something unexpected happened. From the front row, a small hand went up. The crowd turned. It was a child. A little boy no older than 8. Dressed modestly, holding a small, worn-out book in his hand. The audience chuckled. Someone whispered, "Is this a prank?" But the boy, Hamza, walked calmly onto the stage. A member of the organizing committee rushed forward. "We'll find someone more qualified," he whispered nervously to Bernard. But Bernard held up his hand and said, "Let the boy speak. The search for truth doesn't come with an age requirement." He turned to the boy. "Your name, child?" "Hamza," the boy replied with a soft smile. "I'm not here to win anything. I just want to speak from my heart, and use logic. The audience grew silent. Bernard raised an eyebrow. Very well, Hamza. You say you want to prove God exists. The God of Islam, no less. But tell me, how do you prove something you can't see, can't touch, and can't even describe? Hamza looked up, calm and unshaken. Sir, do you believe in gravity? Of course, Bernard replied. Can you see it? No. But we know it exists because we see its effect. Hamza stepped forward. Just like Allah, we cannot see Him directly. But we see His creation, His system, the harmony of the universe. All of it points to a designer. The Qur'an says, there is nothing like unto Him. That's Surah Ash-Shura, verse 11. Allah is beyond our imagination. But that doesn't mean He isn't real. A murmur spread through the audience. Bernard's sharp gaze narrowed. And how do you know it's the Islamic God behind all this? He asked. Other religions make similar claims. Hamza didn't flinch. Because Islam's concept of God is unique. He is not a man, not an animal, not a statue. He was not born, and He does not give birth. Islam teaches that Allah is one, without intermediaries. No sons, no saints, no incarnations. Just pure, undivided monotheism. The Qur'an says, He begets not, nor was He begotten. And there is none like unto Him. That's Surah Al-Ikhlas. A flicker of surprise crossed Bernard's face. This boy wasn't just quoting. He understood. Bernard tried a new angle. If your God is real, why doesn't He make everyone believe in Him? Hamza answered without hesitation. Because life is a test, not a show. If God forced belief, then free will would be meaningless. Allah gives us reason and guidance, and then lets us choose. In Surah Al-Kahf, verse 29, He says, let him who wills believe, and let him who wills disbelieve. Silence fell. The same crowd that once chuckled at the child was now leaning forward in awe. Bernard's lips pressed together. He was trying to stay composed. But something had shifted. The boy wasn't winning the debate. He was changing it. The spotlight bathed the stage in warm light as Hamza stood calmly, his small frame dwarfed by the massive podium beside him. Across from him, Mr. Bernard's grip on his cane tightened. He was not used to being unsettled, certainly not by a child. But Hamza wasn't like anyone Bernard had ever faced. Bernard cleared his throat. Let's continue, he said, trying to regain control. So, Hamza, if you claim that God exists based on logic, then answer me this. If God created everything, who created God? Hamza didn't hesitate. Sir, that question has a false assumption. Only things that have a beginning need a creator. God, by definition, has no beginning, He is eternal. He paused, then continued, If everything needed a creator, then we'd have an infinite chain of causes that never ends. That would mean the universe could never have begun. But it did begin. So logically, there must be something outside time, space, and matter that caused it all. Something uncreated. That is God. The auditorium erupted in soft murmurs. Philosophy professors exchanged glances. Some leaned over to take notes. Hamza had just articulated the cosmological argument, a theory debated by scholars for centuries, with the simplicity of a schoolboy. Bernard took a step forward, trying to shift the momentum. Let's say God exists. But what kind of God allows children to starve? Wars to happen? Disease to spread? Where is this so-called mercy and love? Hamza nodded slowly. That's a very human question, sir. But let's look at it with reason. If God created humans only to live in comfort, then life would have no meaning. But because there are trials, pain, loss, hardship, we grow. We learn patience. We discover compassion. We become better. He opened his Qur'an and read, He who created death and life to test which of you is best indeed. Surah Al-Mulk, verse 2. Tests don't mean God is cruel, Hamza said. They mean he wants us to rise. Bernard's jaw clenched. So you're saying God is good because he lets us suffer? No, Hamza replied gently. God is good because he gives us a chance. He lets us ask, seek, grow. Sir, how many of your own questions were born from suffering? Bernard fell silent. Hamza continued. God allows storms, but he also sends guidance. And he promises, Allah does not burden a soul more than it can bear. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 286. There was no sound in the auditorium except Hamza's steady voice and the distant hum of the lights above. Bernard looked down. He was breathing heavier now, but he refused to stop. What about morality? He said. People can be good without religion. I know atheists who are kinder than priests. Hamza smiled. Yes, people can act good. But without God, what defines good? Who sets the standard? Without God, morality becomes relative. What's right in one place is wrong in another. But with God, morality is anchored in truth, not opinion. He added, without God, killing could be justified in some cultures. With God, there is a higher law above us all. A wave of realization washed across the room. Bernard pointed sharply. But you base that morality on a book. What if the Qur'an is wrong? Hamza responded calmly. That's why Allah tells us to think. The Qur'an doesn't ask blind submission, it urges reflection. It says the worst of creatures are those who do not use reason. Surah Al-Anfal, verse 22. He closed his Qur'an gently and looked up. Islam is not afraid of questions, sir. It's afraid of people refusing to ask. Bernard paced slowly. His usual fire was dimmed, replaced with something unfamiliar, doubt. But not the doubt he was used to wielding against others. Doubt about his own resistance. But science has not proven God, he muttered. There's no empirical evidence. Hamza nodded. Science measures what is material. God is beyond matter. You cannot put him under a microscope. But logic points to him, just like we can't see Wi-Fi waves, but we know they're there because we use them every day. He raised his finger. You can't see love, but its effects are real. You can't see a soul, but when it leaves, the body becomes lifeless. The most powerful things in life are often invisible. A professor in the front row wiped tears from his eyes. Bernard's voice cracked slightly. Then tell me, Hamza, why do you, a child, believe so strongly in something you cannot see? Hamza's answer came softly, but it hit harder than anything said all night. Because my heart is calm when I know he is with me. When I am alone, I am not truly alone. Every time I call out to him, he responds, not always in words, but with peace. He recited gently, verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find peace. Surah Ar-Raid, verse 28. And then something happened no one expected. Mr. Bernard's cane fell from his hand. The sound echoed like thunder through the silent hall. He dropped to his knees. His hands trembled. His chest heaved. I've searched for 60 years, he whispered, his voice breaking. And today, a child opened my eyes. Hamza stepped forward and gently held his hand. God is never far, sir, he said softly. It's just that our hearts sometimes build walls. Bernard's lips quivered. His eyes welled with tears. Then, in front of hundreds of onlookers, with TV cameras rolling and history being written, he raised his hands and said aloud, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. The hall erupted. There were no shouts of victory, no applause for triumph, only takbir, whispered prayers, and tearful silence. Even those who did not share the faith could only stand, humbled by the weight of what had just unfolded. The billionaire atheist, the man who had once ridiculed God, was now weeping in peace, with an 8-year-old boy holding his hand. The silence that followed Mr. Bernard's shahada was sacred. The kind that presses against the chest and swells in the throat. The kind that lingers long after the sound fades. People forgot to breathe. Some wept openly. Others simply stared, trying to absorb what they had just witnessed. The billionaire who had shaken the foundations of faith for 60 years had finally bowed to the one he had spent a lifetime denying. Hamza didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply stood beside Bernard, clutching his small Qur'an against his chest. His expression was peaceful, like someone who had always known the light would break through, even in the thickest darkness. The host, stunned, approached the stage with a large ceremonial check, millions of dollars promised by Bernard as a reward to whoever could prove God's existence. A cameraman zoomed in on the oversized check as it was presented to Hamza, who looked down at the paper, then up at Mr. Bernard. He gently handed the check back to the host and said, "I didn't come for money." A hush fell again. Then Hamza turned toward the audience and continued, "But if this money can help those in need, the hungry, the sick, the oppressed, regardless of whether they are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, or not religious at all, then divide it and give it all away. Because Allah loves those who help His creation." The moment was electric. What began as a debate had turned into something far deeper, a transformation of souls. People stood. Not out of formality, but out of reverence. Applause wasn't necessary. The real sound that filled the room was something more profound, the stirring of hearts. That night, journalists struggled to describe what had happened. Social media lit up across the world. Clips of the child calmly debating one of the sharpest minds on earth went viral. The headline appeared everywhere. 8-year-old Muslim boy defeats legendary atheist in historic debate. But what made people share it wasn't the clash, it was the calm. The sincerity. The way a little boy carried timeless truth without needing to raise his voice. Days passed. Then weeks. Mr. Bernard, now simply known as Abdullah Bernard, was seen less often in public. His vast estate became quieter. The libraries once used to study religion to dismantle it were now filled with recitations of the Qur'an. One morning, he was spotted sitting alone in a park near the debate venue, an open Qur'an in his lap. A gentle breeze rustled its pages. His finger traced each verse with the tender caution of someone holding something sacred. Something he had searched for all his life, but never truly believed he'd find. A reporter once approached him, hoping to spark controversy again. "Mr. Bernard," he asked, "what made you change?" The old man looked up, his eyes clearer than ever. "I didn't change," he replied. "I just finally recognized what had been calling me for decades." He paused. "For 60 years I trusted my mind. But Hamza showed me that faith isn't in contradiction with logic. It completes it. What changed me wasn't just a child's argument, it was his peace." The reporter asked, "And what about the backlash? People say you were swayed by emotion, that the event was sensationalized." Bernard smiled gently. "Those people are still looking for God in books and syllogisms. I did too. Until I realized, sometimes the evidence doesn't arrive as an answer. It arrives as light." Meanwhile, Hamza went back to his normal life. No cameras followed him home. No fame seemed to change him. He returned to school, helped his mother with groceries, and prayed in his small neighborhood masjid like nothing had happened. But something had changed. Not just in Bernard, but in millions of hearts across the world. People from different faiths began revisiting the Qur'an. Philosophy students rewatched the debate with tears. Atheists wrote long blogs admitting they had been touched, not convinced, but softened. And then came the challengers. In academic journals and talk shows, groups of secular thinkers began accusing Bernard of being manipulated. He was old, they claimed. It was emotional weakness, not logic. A televised panel of intellectuals tried to dissect the debate, looking for loopholes. "The child used poetic language," one said. He quoted scripture, not reason, said another. But even as they tried to unravel it, deep down, they knew they had felt something too. Bernard refused to engage. Once a man who thrived on conflict, he now lived in quiet reflection. "I've argued with the smartest minds alive," he said in a rare interview, "but none of them ever brought me peace. Hamza didn't just answer me, he healed something in me." At the same time, Hamza was invited to speak at an interfaith seminar hosted by a prestigious university. Professors, priests, monks, rabbis, and imams filled the hall. The stage was far larger than the boy, but he stood there as confidently as ever, holding his small Qur'an, the same one he'd taken to the debate. He spoke softly but clearly. "Islam does not need me to defend it. Allah does not need human defense. It is humans who need answers. And Allah has already given them, in the Qur'an. But only to those who are willing to open their minds, their ears, and their hearts." A Catholic priest stood and asked, "You're very young. How do you know that you are not simply following emotions or inherited belief?" Hamza's response stunned the room. "I did not inherit Islam blindly," he said. "I asked questions. I challenged. I looked for answers. Like Prophet Abraham, who questioned the stars and the moon and the sun, until he recognized the one who created them all." He quoted, "Indeed, I have turned my face toward him who created the heavens and the earth, inclining toward truth. And I am not of those who associate others with Allah." Surah Al-An'am, verse 79. There was no applause. Just silence. That deep silence again. The kind that doesn't ask for noise, because the heart is already speaking. Outside, in the cool night air, Mr. Bernard sat in a wheelchair, waiting for Hamza. His health was beginning to decline. But his spirit had never stood taller. When Hamza stepped out, Bernard took his hand. "Thank you," he whispered, "for guiding me through the longest search of my life." Hamza lowered his gaze in humility. "I didn't guide anyone, sir. Only Allah gives guidance. I was just a small lantern, in your long night." Bernard's eyes shone with tears. "Then let me become a lantern too. Even if it's late." And from that day forward, the man who once mocked religion began to write again. Not to destroy faith, but to describe his journey toward it. Mr. Bernard's study, once cold and clinical, now held a different warmth. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves were still filled with religious texts, but they no longer felt like trophies of conquest. They felt like companions. Every morning, he sat by the window with the Qur'an in his lap, sunlight pouring in, his fingers tracing the Arabic letters like a man rediscovering his soul. He no longer debated. He wrote. But his new writings weren't about tearing down beliefs. They were personal reflections, filled with humility. Memories of late-night debates, moments of doubt, and the weight of a long search that only ended when he allowed light to enter. The title of his new manuscript was simple but profound. "The Last Light, From Philosophy to Prostration." In it he wrote, "I was not defeated by an argument. I was healed by the calmness of a child who didn't try to win, he simply shared what brought him peace. I had tried to measure God with tools of the mind, but I finally found him through the stillness of the heart." The book was unlike anything he had ever written before. There was no arrogance. No sharp corners. Just stories. His journey. His losses. His empty victories. And the night he finally bowed, not out of defeat, but out of realization. He included reflections on verses that had pierced through decades of intellectual pride. "And we are closer to him than his jugular vein." Surah Kaf, verse 16. "And Allah guides whom He wills." Surah Al-Kahf, verse 17. The book was published and translated into over a dozen languages. But it wasn't marketed as a religious text. It was sold in philosophy sections, in libraries, in university bookshops. And that's where it found its audience, the seekers, the skeptics. The ones who had spent their lives asking questions but had never known where to listen for answers. One afternoon, Bernard received a letter from a young atheist in Germany. I watched your debate with Hamza. I didn't convert, but something changed. I used to scoff at faith. Now I'm quiet around it. I don't know if I believe in God yet, but I've started reading the Qur'an. Not to argue. Just to see what it says. Thank you. Another came from a Jewish rabbi in Chicago. Your journey reminded me that hearts are reached not by force, but by sincerity. I may never walk the same path as you, but I deeply respect it. And another from a former Buddhist monk in Thailand. Your metaphor of the lantern in the long night brought me to tears. That boy, Hamza, he is not just a child. He is a mirror for many of us who forgot what pure truth looks like. But not all responses were supportive. Some of Bernard's former peers accused him of betrayal. You were once a pillar of reason, one letter read. Now you've sold out to emotion and fairy tales. Bernard read those letters too, and then quietly set them aside. He no longer felt the need to win arguments. I have nothing to prove, he told the reporter. Because I'm not trying to convince others. I'm just sharing what finally brought me peace. Back in his hometown, Hamza remained the same humble boy. He didn't allow interviews. He refused invitations to TV shows. When asked why, he said, I'm just a student. I only spoke because the truth needed to be heard. Not because I wanted to be known. But the world wouldn't let his story fade so easily. He was invited to speak again, this time at a national interfaith dialogue hosted at a major American university. Scholars, clergy, scientists, and students filled the auditorium. As Hamza stood on stage once more, holding the same worn Qur'an, he addressed the audience with the same calm tone that had once disarmed Mr. Bernard. Islam does not fear science, he said. It invites inquiry. It welcomes questions. But the Qur'an is more than a book of verses, it is a book of reminders. For minds that think, and hearts that reflect. A professor in the audience asked, Hamza, you're still so young. What if, one day, you find out you were wrong? That what you believe is just a product of culture or emotion? Hamza smiled. Then I will question again. Just like I did before. But I don't follow Islam because I was born into it. I follow it because I searched. I asked. I tested. I found. He paused, then quoted. Indeed, those who reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth say, Our Lord, you did not create all this without purpose. Surah Al-Imran, verse 191. A hush fell over the audience. No one clapped. No one spoke. There was only stillness. The kind that lingers when truth is spoken without ego. Outside the auditorium, Bernard sat in a wheelchair, waiting beneath the shade of an oak tree. Age had caught up to his body, but his eyes were full of light. When Hamza walked out, Bernard reached for his hand. Do you remember what you told me that night? He asked. Hamza nodded. That God is not far, only our hearts sometimes refuse to come closer. Bernard smiled faintly. Yes. That. He looked out over the horizon. I spent my whole life searching for a door. And the whole time, it was open. I just never stepped in. Hamza replied softly. The Quran calls it guidance. But it's also mercy. Because Allah waits, no matter how long we take. Bernard nodded slowly. And now that I've entered, I only wish I had done it sooner. They sat in silence for a while. No cameras. No crowds. Just an old man who had once mocked faith and a little boy who reminded the world what faith could really look like. That evening, Bernard made one final journal entry. His hand trembled as he wrote, but his words were clear. I found God not when I thought I knew best, but when I finally admitted that I knew nothing. He closed the book, set down his pen, and whispered a prayer under his breath in a language he once ridiculed but now loved. He didn't ask for anything. He just thanked Allah for sending a child to rescue an old man. Months passed. Winter softened into spring. And in the quiet corners of the world, something extraordinary began to unfold. All across the globe, people, young and old, believers and skeptics, were sharing clips from the debate. Not because of how loud it was, but because of how gentle it had been. Not because Hamza won, but because he reminded the world that truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be shown with sincerity. From cafes in Istanbul to college dorms in Chicago, from refugee shelters in Gaza to lecture halls in Singapore, people talked about the boy who changed a billionaire's heart, not with anger, but with verses of light. In a small bookstore in Paris, a copy of The Last Light, From Philosophy to Prostration, sat at the front window. Its cover was simple, just a silhouette of a child holding a Qur'an next to an elderly man resting his hand on the boy's shoulder. It wasn't marketed as a bestseller. But it became one. It didn't try to convert anyone. But it transformed many. Back in St. Louis, Mr. Bernard's health continued to decline. His once commanding voice grew softer. His steps slowed until they ceased altogether. But his soul, it soared. Hamza would visit him often. They'd sit together under the same oak tree outside the auditorium where everything began. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in silence. One morning, Bernard looked at Hamza and said, "When I first stood on that stage, I thought I was untouchable. I thought knowledge made me powerful." He turned slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "But in the end, it was a child with a worn-out book and a heart full of peace who taught me what real strength is." Hamza held his hand. "That wasn't me, sir. It was Allah who softened your heart." Bernard nodded. "And I thank him for it every day." He paused. "If only more people understood that the truth isn't complicated. It's just uncomfortable for those too proud to listen." One evening, Mr. Bernard fell ill. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet fading. Doctors said it wouldn't be long. He had already prepared for it. But before he passed, he made one final request, that his wealth be used to establish a global education fund, not for Islamic preaching, not for religious conversion, but for spreading truth, critical thinking, charity, and peace. He insisted the name be simple. The Lantern Project. Its mission was clear: support children who ask sincere questions. Fund schools that teach both science and ethics. Print books that explore philosophy and faith side by side. Sponsor meals for the hungry, medicine for the poor, and scholarships for any child who seeks truth, regardless of race, religion, or nationality. And the first honorary ambassador? Hamza. On a quiet Friday morning, as birds chirped softly outside the window, Mr. Bernard took his last breath. He passed away in peace, with the Qur'an resting on his chest, and the name Abdullah Bernard written gently on the final page of his journal. His funeral was simple, just as he had wished. No grand ceremony. No speeches. Just a prayer, a few friends, and a boy named Hamza standing silently at the edge of the crowd, head bowed in calm remembrance. Weeks later, in a small masjid library, Hamza opened a new copy of The Last Light. On the final page, right beneath Bernard's signature, a single handwritten line had been added before he died. "Let my failure and pride become someone else's path to truth. If a child can carry the light, maybe all of us can too, if we just lower our guard." Hamza gently closed the book and whispered a quiet Ameen. And so the story continued, not with spotlights, nor stages, but in the hearts of those who read it. Teachers read it to their students. Parents read it to their children. An imam in Bosnia used the book as a discussion point for interfaith understanding. A Jewish rabbi used it to teach the importance of humility. A Catholic priest quoted it in a sermon about sincerity. Even a famous scientist from Tokyo admitted in a podcast, "I still don't believe in God. But after reading that boy's story, I believe in something again. And maybe that's a start. As for Hamza, he kept studying. He kept asking questions. He kept helping his mother in the kitchen. And every night, after prayer, he would open the same worn-out Qur'an and recite a verse that had become his anchor. Indeed, Allah is with those who are patient, those who do good, and those who seek the truth. The world tried to turn him into a celebrity. But he refused. I am not a miracle, he would tell interviewers. I am not a genius. I'm just someone who asked questions with an open heart, and listened when the answers came. And in a world full of noise, distraction, and ego, that made him one of the rarest people of all. Epilogue: The light remains. In a museum built to honor thinkers who changed the world, a small exhibit was added near the end of the philosophy wing. No gold. No spotlight. Just a glass case. Inside, a cane, a Qur'an, and a child's drawing of a lantern with words written in English, Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin. The quote was from Bernard himself. I spent my life searching for a God I could argue with. I found peace when I stopped talking and started listening. Visitors leave that room quietly. No one speaks loudly in front of that case. Because in that quiet corner, something deeper than reason remains. The legacy of a debate. That became a Dawah. The logic of a child. That humbled a legend. And the truth of Islam. That pierced through 60 years of darkness. With the light of one honest heart. Today, a senior CIA officer, trained to detect threats, destroy ideologies, and question everything, stands face to face with a 9-year-old Muslim girl whose only weapon is the Qur'an. This isn't just a debate. It's a clash between ego and innocence. Between doubt and divine truth. Between a heart locked by years of disbelief. And a voice so pure, it might just break through. Agent Jonathan Reeve asked the toughest questions. Questions that silenced scholars, shook philosophers, and broke theologians. But this time, he asked them to a child. And her answers? They didn't just silence the room. They shattered the walls around his heart. This is Legacy of Islam, where the smallest voice sometimes delivers the greatest truth. The sun filtered through the tall glass windows of Columbia University's grand auditorium. It was a crisp spring afternoon in New York City, but inside, the atmosphere was tense, thick with anticipation. The stage had been set for an event titled Faith, Extremism, and the Future, an Open Dialogue. The host was no ordinary academic. Seated at the right of the stage in a tailored black suit was Agent Jonathan Reeve, a senior CIA officer with a reputation that sent chills down spines in intelligence circles. With 22 years of field experience, he had interrogated war criminals, negotiated covert treaties, and led counterterrorism operations across the globe. He had seen religion, especially Islam, used as a cover for violence. And today, he was here to expose what he believed was a dangerous illusion masked as faith. But when he looked across the stage to see his debate opponent, he blinked. Twice. A little girl sat calmly, legs dangling off the tall chair, her white hijab perfectly wrapped, her eyes curious yet fearless. She wore a light blue dress and held a small, well-worn copy of the Qur'an in her lap. She looked like she belonged in a school recital, not a national-level debate against a CIA interrogator. Her name was Fatima Zahra. Just 9 years old. A Hafiza of the Qur'an. And, for reasons that puzzled everyone, she had been invited by her Islamic school to represent their faith in this interfaith dialogue. The room was full. Scholars, students, journalists, and even diplomats had gathered, expecting sparks. Cameras were rolling. The moderator adjusted his mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "this is not a contest. It is a conversation. One rooted in truth, driven by questions, and, hopefully, guided by sincerity. Agent Reeve leaned forward. His jaw was clenched, eyes focused, voice sharp. "I'll be direct," he began. "I've spent my life tracking threats. And too often they wear the mask of faith. I've seen radicals quote scripture as they plant bombs. I've interrogated men who said God wills it, while planning bloodshed." He looked at Fatima. "You say Islam is peace. But tell me, what kind of peace raises children to memorize a book instead of explore science, art, or logic?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. Cameras zoomed in on the girl. Fatima didn't flinch. Her voice was soft but clear. "Agent Reeve," she said, "science, art, and logic are beautiful. But without purpose, they're just tools. The Qur'an gave me purpose first, so I could explore everything else with a heart that knows why it beats." A murmur rippled through the room. Reeve raised an eyebrow. "That sounds rehearsed." Fatima smiled slightly. "No, sir. That sounds lived." A pause. The moderator turned to Reeve again. Reeve leaned back for a second, then crossed his arms. "All right," he said. "Tell me, Fatima, do you even understand the book you're quoting? Or is it just memory games? Children can be trained to recite anything. That doesn't make it truth." "I understand enough to know it changes hearts," she replied. He snorted. "Hearts? This world is run by logic, not hearts. The Qur'an says man was made from a clot of blood. That's not logic. That's mythology." Fatima opened her small Qur'an, flipping gently to a page. "Surah Al-Alaq," she said softly. "Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot." She paused. "This verse doesn't deny science, it predates it. Human development, as embryology now confirms, begins as a clot-like structure." Reeve's smile faded. He didn't expect her to respond with medical knowledge. She continued, "When this verse was revealed, the world believed in superstitions. But the Qur'an spoke of biological facts that were confirmed only centuries later." A hand went up in the crowd, a biology professor nodding in agreement. Reeve tried to shake it off. "Let's talk about creation," he said, voice louder. "Your book says the universe was made in 6 days. Scientists say billions of years. Explain that." Fatima nodded. "The Arabic word used, ayam, doesn't only mean days as we know them. It can mean periods or phases. Many scholars say it refers to 6 stages of creation, not literal 24-hour days." She paused. "Language can be deep, Agent Reeve. You know that. You work with codes." A soft laugh from the audience. Even Reeve couldn't help but smile, just for a second. The moderator jumped in. "Agent Reeve, would you say these answers challenge your perception?" Reeve leaned in again, eyes narrowing. "I've interrogated warlords, child soldiers, and hardened terrorists. They all spoke with confidence too. But conviction isn't the same as truth." Fatima responded calmly. "I agree. That's why Islam doesn't ask you to believe blindly. It asks you to think, reflect, ask, and explore." She looked into his eyes. "You're not wrong to question, sir. But are you willing to hear answers, even if they're not the ones you expected?" The auditorium was silent. The only sound was the distant hum of an air vent. Even the live-stream chat paused, as if holding its breath. Reeve blinked. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The moderator glanced between them. "Let's pause here," he said, "before moving deeper into this dialogue." Applause broke out, slowly then louder. But Reeve wasn't clapping. He was thinking. For the first time in years, not about strategy, intelligence, or threat levels, but about a verse recited by a child, from a book he'd spent most of his life avoiding. And in the back of his mind, a question whispered. What if she's right? The lights dimmed briefly as the second round of the debate resumed. Agent Jonathan Reeves sat stiffly in his chair. His posture was straight, but his mind was beginning to lean, just a little. That last question from the child had unsettled something within him. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone under 4 feet tall. The moderator cleared his throat. We now move into the second segment, Truth versus Tradition. Mr. Reeve, the floor is yours. Reeve stood this time, abandoning formality for authority. His voice echoed. You're all impressed by her poise. I'll admit I am too. But poise doesn't make something true. Let's stop playing games. He turned directly to Fatima. Your holy book says the earth was created in 6 days. That Noah lived hundreds of years. That angels write down your every move. He paced slightly. These are not scientific claims. They are fairy tales dressed as scripture. Gasps scattered through the audience. Fatima's expression didn't change. Reeve continued, voice harder now. And let's address the elephant in the room. If God exists, why doesn't he show up? Why doesn't he walk onto this stage right now and prove himself? Why the hiding? Silence. He folded his arms and looked down at Fatima. I'm listening. She slowly stood up. She was small, but in that moment, the room belonged to her. Agent Reeve, she said softly, if God appeared every time we doubted him, there would be no test left. She took a breath. Faith is not blindness. It's a choice to trust what reason can't reach, and ego can't swallow. Reeve's eyebrow twitched. Convenient answer. Fatima tilted her head. Let me ask you something, sir. Have you ever felt love? He frowned. That's irrelevant. She smiled. It's not. Love can't be seen under a microscope. You can't weigh it, dissect it, or hold it in your hand. But when it's real, it changes everything. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage. God is like that, sir. Just because you can't see him, doesn't mean he isn't there. You can't see gravity either, but you trust it every time you take a step. The audience leaned in. Reeve laughed once, a short bitter sound. All right, then let's get serious. Your book says men were created from clay. That a talking fire spoke to Moses. That the sea parted in 2. I've worked in labs. I've studied physics. That's not how the world works. Fatima nodded respectfully. You're right. That's not how the world usually works. She paused. But that's what makes it a miracle. He scoffed. You expect me to believe in magic? No, she replied. I expect you to believe in power beyond your lab reports. Her tone remained calm, never sarcastic, never angry. She turned toward the audience. Agent Reeve sees the world through analysis. He calculates patterns. But God is not a pattern. He is the one who designed the pattern. If the laws of nature exist, is it so hard to believe that the one who made them can suspend them when he wills? Murmurs of agreement spread through the hall. Reeve looked slightly cornered. But he wasn't done. He pointed again, voice sharp. If your God is so powerful, why is the world still bleeding? Why are children dying in Gaza? Why are churches being bombed? Why are innocent people suffering? His voice cracked slightly, an edge of something personal bleeding through. Fatima's tone softened. That question hurts us too. She looked down for a moment, then back up. Pain doesn't mean absence. A doctor causes pain with a needle to heal a disease. A parent takes away a toy to teach restraint. God allows suffering sometimes, not because he enjoys it, but because this life isn't the end. She looked him in the eyes. You ask why God doesn't stop evil. But he gave us the choice to stop it. And many don't. Reeve's lips tightened. His mind raced back to places he had tried to forget. Interrogation rooms, drone footage, bodies and dust. A little girl's shoes in an Iraqi alley. His chest felt heavy. He shook it off. Let's talk about justice then, he said. If God is just, then why are bad people rich and good people starving? Fatima nodded. Because this isn't the court. This is the test. The judgment comes later. She paused again. Sir, have you ever seen a student cheat and still get a better grade? It hurts, yes. But the teacher waits. The test ends. Then results come. She stepped back, her eyes lowering. That's when true justice begins. Reeve looked at her for a moment. This girl had no training. No script. Just a belief so deep, it couldn't be shaken even by questions meant to destroy it. He finally sat down again, slowly. The moderator spoke up. We'll take a brief pause before we move to the next segment. The crowd buzzed with quiet conversation. Some clapped. Some just stared. Backstage, an assistant handed Fatima a bottle of water. She smiled and thanked her softly. A few rows back, an elderly man, clearly Jewish by his kippah, whispered to the person beside him. That child speaks like she's lived 1,000 years. Agent Reeve rubbed his temples, silently watching. He wasn't just debating a child anymore. He was debating something inside himself. The stage lights came back up. A hush returned over the audience as the moderator stood once more at center stage. We now enter segment 3, he announced. Faith and free will. The questions that have puzzled philosophers for centuries. Tonight, they find their way into this hall. Agent Jonathan Reeves sat with his hands clasped, elbows on the table. His eyes were less sharp now, more searching. His earlier confidence had taken a hit, not because he lost, but because something inside him had begun to move. Slightly. Quietly. He took a breath and leaned forward. Fatima, he said more slowly this time, if your God is perfect, why didn't he create perfect people? She looked up from her notes. Because he didn't want robots, she replied simply. Reeve tilted his head. Explain. Fatima stood, small hands resting on the podium. If we were perfect, we wouldn't have the ability to choose right or wrong. There would be no growth, no learning, no real love, because love without choice is just programming. She continued, God created us with the ability to fail, so that our choosing the good would mean something. Reeve sat back. So he made us faulty, just to watch us struggle? Fatima smiled sadly. No, sir. He made us capable, to watch us rise. The audience stirred again. Reeve exhaled through his nose, visibly conflicted. All right, he said, voice graver now. You say we have free will. But your book also says everything is written. Destiny. The law al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet. If everything is already written, what's the point of choice? Fatima nodded slowly. That's a question even adults wrestle with, she said. But think of it this way. If a teacher knows a student will fail because he didn't study, is it the teacher's fault? Reeve blinked. She continued, knowledge is not control. God knowing your choices doesn't mean he forced you to make them. He just knows what you'll choose before you do. Like a writer who knows the end of his story, but still lets his characters speak freely. Reeve tapped his pen against the desk. So we're all just stories to him? Fatima looked him in the eyes. No, she said. We are beloved stories, waiting to choose how they end. That line hit something deep. The crowd had gone quiet again, not out of politeness, but because no one wanted to break the fragile silence that followed her words. Reeve cleared his throat. And if someone makes all the wrong choices? He asked. If they've mocked faith, denied God, hurt people, spread doubt? What then? There was a pause. Fatima didn't answer right away. Her eyes softened. Then they repent, she said gently. Our God is the most merciful. One sincere tear can wipe away 1,000 sins. She paused, then added, even a CIA agent can start over. There was a short laugh in the audience, but it wasn't mocking. It was human. Reeve looked down, a flicker of emotion in his eyes, though he quickly masked it. He stood again, changing the pace. Let's talk about morality then, he said. If a man dies without hearing of Islam, does he go to hell? Fatima answered carefully. Only God knows people's hearts. Islam teaches us that everyone is judged fairly. If someone never had the truth, or only saw a twisted version of it, they won't be punished for ignorance. She raised a finger gently. But if someone sees the truth, and still turns away out of arrogance or hate, that's different. Reeve folded his arms again. And what about people of other faiths who live good lives? Christians, Jews, even atheists who help the poor, feed the hungry, protect others. Are they all just wrong? Fatima's voice softened. Doing good is beautiful. Islam doesn't deny that. But doing good without recognizing the one who created good is like sending a thank you card without knowing who to address it to. A silence settled over the room again. She added, We don't claim ownership of goodness. We just believe in submitting to its source. Reeve nodded slowly. So your religion claims the truth. Just like every other religion. Fatima looked down for a moment, then back at him. Every religion may claim truth. But not every religion invites you to read its book and question it. Islam does. She stepped forward. Sir, have you ever read the Qur'an? Reeve froze. I've glanced at it, he replied, unsure of how honest to be. Fatima extended her small hand toward her copy. Then start with mine. The gesture was simple. Quiet. But it shook something in him. He didn't take the book. Not yet. But his hand twitched. The moderator stepped in. Let's prepare for our final segment. The audience began to buzz again as Fatima returned to her seat. Reeve sat silently. The voices around him blurred. In his mind, something was unraveling. A memory. A moment. A regret. He remembered a conversation with his late mother, a church-going woman who'd once whispered to him, You've seen so much evil, John, but don't let it blind you to the good. He had dismissed her at the time. But now, her words echoed alongside the verses of a child he could no longer dismiss. He looked across the stage. Fatima wasn't looking at him anymore. She was quietly flipping through her Qur'an, searching not for proof, but for peace. And in that moment, for the first time in decades, Agent Jonathan Reeve wasn't sure which side of the argument he stood on. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly again. The moderator walked forward, his voice lower, more reverent now. We've discussed science, free will, and belief. For our final segment, we enter the emotional heart of faith. Morality. Suffering. Identity. He looked at Agent Jonathan Reeve. Mr. Reeve, the floor is yours. Reeve didn't stand this time. He didn't need to. His voice came low and steady through the microphone. You've spoken well, Fatima. Better than I expected. Better than most. He looked down at the table, then slowly back up. But there's something you haven't explained. Not really. He paused. His next words didn't come like the rest. They came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere older. I was deployed in Mosul in 2007. My unit entered a school bomb just hours before. We found children slaughtered. Tiny shoes. Blood on the walls. And the men who did it left behind pages of the Qur'an. He leaned forward, voice sharp now. Don't tell me Islam is peace. I've seen what it does when it's twisted. The audience was silent. Not shocked, but unsure of how to breathe. Fatima stood again. This time slower. She looked at Reeve, not as an opponent, but as a man carrying something too heavy for one's soul. I won't deny your pain, she said gently. You saw horror. I haven't. And I can't explain what you felt. But please. She stepped forward slightly. Don't judge a river by the blood someone spilled in it. He stared at her. She continued, There are those who've hijacked this faith, twisted verses, corrupted hearts. They use religion to justify hate. But Islam never gave them permission. Her voice cracked slightly. In my Qur'an it says, whoever kills a soul, it is as if he has killed all of mankind. A tear welled up in the eyes of a woman in the second row. Fatima's voice steadied again. When people bomb, shoot, torture, they don't represent 1.9 billion Muslims. They represent their own sickness. And sometimes, people like you end up cleaning their mess. Reeves' eyes narrowed, but not in anger. In restraint. His knuckles were white as he clenched his hands. Fatima stepped closer. Let me ask you something, sir. If a man commits a crime wearing a police uniform, do you blame the entire police force? Or the man? Silence. She didn't wait for him to answer. And if someone commits evil holding a Qur'an, do you blame the book? Or the heart that poisoned it? Reeve closed his eyes briefly. No cameras could fully capture what was happening inside him. This wasn't about Islam anymore. It was about the walls he'd built, after years of war, betrayal, and fire. Fatima's voice turned softer. I know the world looks at us, Muslims, and sees only headlines. But I wish they could see my mother praying at dawn. My father feeding the homeless after work. My brother studying medicine to help war victims. She looked around the room. We are not the monsters in your reports. We are the people you never noticed, because we didn't explode. A wave of gasps and nods swept through the audience. One man clapped. Then two. Then more. The moderator raised his hand to calm the room, but even he was wiping a tear. Fatima sat down slowly. Her hands trembled just slightly in her lap. Reeve stared at her for a long time. Then he did something unexpected. He stood. I was 12. He began, voice distant. My father died of cancer. My mother told me to pray. I tried. For weeks. I sat in my room, whispering into nothing. And nothing answered. He looked at the ceiling. I stopped believing that year. Stopped asking. Stopped hoping. His voice turned cold again. And when I grew up, I replaced faith with facts. I learned how to interrogate, how to extract truth through pressure. That became my religion. He looked at Fatima now, not with arrogance, but with fatigue. But tonight a little girl did what decades of training couldn't. Fatima tilted her head slightly. You didn't interrogate me, sir, she said. You listened. Reeve chuckled softly. That may be the first time I've done that, without suspicion. He paused. Then he looked at the audience. Do you all think she won? There were murmurs. Smiles. A few clapped again. But Reeve raised his hand. She didn't win. She didn't need to. He turned back to Fatima. Because I'm not here to win either. A long pause. I'm just tired of fighting what I don't understand. The moderator stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. We will now close the formal portion of the debate. But no one moved. Reeve stayed standing. Fatima looked up, eyes shining with quiet strength. I don't have all the answers, she said. But I know where to look. She held out her Qur'an once again. This time, Reeve didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and took it from her hands. The room exploded into quiet awe. A man who had interrogated prophets in pixels now held their words in his hands. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. Because sometimes, the sound of a soul turning is louder than a shout. The debate had officially ended. But no one had left. The crowd sat frozen in their seats, as if afraid that the moment might vanish if they moved. The only sound was the soft hum of overhead lights and the occasional creak of someone shifting in their chair. Agent Jonathan Reeves stood at the edge of the stage, still holding the Qur'an in both hands. His fingers moved over the cover, rough from use, smooth at the edges from years of someone else's reverence. The little girl who gave it to him now sat quietly, looking down at her lap. She didn't need to say anything more. Her job was done. But Reeves had just begun. He turned and walked slowly off stage. The moderator made no effort to stop him. There was no applause, no music. Just breathless silence trailing him as he exited through a side door into a narrow backstage hallway. Once outside, Reeve leaned against the cool concrete wall, the Qur'an still clutched in one hand. His breath was uneven. His mind a battlefield. Why now? Why her? He had outmaneuvered terrorist masterminds. Survived ambushes. Cracked encrypted intel with a cup of coffee and 5 hours of sleep. But nothing, had unraveled him the way this child's words had. He opened the book. It fell to a verse that had been underlined in blue ink. Probably by Fatima herself. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. Surah Ash-Shar. His eyes stung. A flash from memory hit him like a wave, his mother's voice, sick and frail, whispering that verse from her Bible when he was a boy. Trouble don't last always, baby. Just keep asking God. But he had stopped asking. Stopped long ago. Reeve closed the book and sat on a bench in the hallway. The tension in his chest refused to lift. And then, quiet footsteps. He looked up. It was the moderator. I figured you'd want space, the man said. But I also figured you didn't want to be alone. Reeve didn't reply for a few seconds. Then, you ever feel like everything you've known is about to collapse? The moderator smiled faintly. That's what truth feels like sometimes. Reeve looked down at the book in his hands. I don't know how to do this. I've built my life on questioning people who believe in things they can't prove. But tonight, he said slowly, I met someone who didn't need proof. She was proof. The moderator sat beside him. Faith doesn't cancel reason, Jonathan. It fills in what reason can't explain. What you felt up there, it wasn't weakness. It was permission. Permission for what? Reeve asked. To feel again. The words sat with him for a while. Then he stood. I need to walk. He walked alone through the garden behind the auditorium. The air was cool now, stars barely visible through New York City glow. He passed a small fountain. Stopped. Bent down. Washed his hands. Washed his face. Something inside him cracked. And then, tears. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady tears, like a dam breaking softly after years of pressure. He didn't know how long he stood there. Maybe minutes. Maybe lifetimes. Then, he heard footsteps again. But this time, it wasn't the moderator. It was her. Fatima. She stood at a distance, not intruding. He turned to her. I thought you left. I was praying, she said. And then I thought, maybe someone else needs prayer too. He almost smiled. Then, softly, why did you give me this? He held up the Qur'an. She looked up at him. Because it saved me, she replied. And maybe it can save you too. He nodded slowly. But still, he hesitated. I've insulted your faith. Mocked your book. Doubted your God. How can I suddenly believe? Isn't that hypocrisy? She shook her head gently. No, sir. That's humility. Then she said, if you're standing at the edge of truth, the only wrong choice is to walk away. He stared at her. Then at the Qur'an. His hands trembled now. He looked up at the sky. The stars blinked quietly above. He closed his eyes. And whispered, not for the crowd, not for the cameras. Just for himself. God, if you are there, if this is real, guide me. Please. He didn't expect a voice. He didn't hear one. But the silence that followed felt like an answer. And when he opened his eyes, he felt lighter than he had in years. The next morning, the auditorium was quiet. No stage lights. No cameras. No crowd. Just a few chairs stacked to the side, and a vacuum cleaner humming faintly in the background. A cleaning staff member nodded at the security guard, who was reviewing last night's footage on his tablet, watching a man change. But in the far left wing of the building, inside a small prayer room reserved for interfaith guests, something far more powerful was happening. Agent Jonathan Reeves stood barefoot on the carpet, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, the Qur'an still in his hand, open now, read, not just held. Beside him stood the moderator, now simply Jonathan's companion. And next to him, little Fatima Zahra, smiling gently, a fresh Qur'an in a gift bag clutched between her fingers. A local Muslim scholar had been invited to perform the Shahida ceremony. He stood calmly, his beard silver, eyes kind. "Are you ready, brother?" he asked gently. Jonathan Reeve looked down, then up again. His face showed no fear, only surrender. "I don't understand everything yet," he admitted, "but I know one thing." He looked toward Fatima. "She brought light to a place I didn't even know was dark." He turned to the scholar. "Yes. I'm ready." The man nodded. "Repeat after me." And in a clear, steady voice, the man who once interrogated believers, now whispered the very words that would change his life. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." Fatima's eyes sparkled. The moderator lowered his head. The Imam smiled with gratitude. And Jonathan, he wept. Not from guilt. Not from fear. But from peace. Peace that had eluded him through 2 wars, 3 continents, and 1,000 failed prayers to a God he thought had forgotten him. Jonathan Reeves stood once more at the same podium where he had doubted, demanded, and debated. But this time, he stood not as a challenger, but as a witness. The university had allowed a follow-up gathering for students and press. Word had spread fast. The CIA agent converted to Islam. Speculation, curiosity, disbelief, everyone wanted to know more. He cleared his throat. No notes this time. He began. "I've spent my whole life depending on paper. Scripts. Files. Evidence. Strategy." He looked at the audience. "But no piece of paper ever gave me what a 9-year-old girl gave me last night." Soft laughter rippled through the room. He smiled. "Fatima didn't beat me with logic, though she could have. She didn't shame me, challenge me, or trap me." He paused. "She just told the truth. And my heart knew it before my mind admitted it." He turned toward Fatima, who sat in the front row, her white hijab glowing under the lights. She didn't just defend Islam. She lived it. He stepped closer to the microphone. "When I was a boy, I used to think God was like a judge, always watching, ready to punish. Then I stopped believing altogether. But yesterday, I met a God of mercy." The room grew still. "I thought strength meant never kneeling. Now I know, real strength is knowing when to kneel, to something greater than yourself." He held up the Qur'an. "This book is not what I thought it was. It's not a weapon. It's a mirror. And I didn't like what I saw in it, until I realized it was showing me who I could become." He lowered his voice. "I don't expect everyone here to understand. I didn't either. But if you've ever felt a crack in your soul, if you've ever wondered whether this world has meaning beyond what your senses can grasp." He pointed at the book again. "Try reading this, with your heart open." Silence. Then applause. Not the polite kind. The real kind. The kind that comes from souls who just witnessed something they know they'll never forget. 1 year later, Istanbul, Turkey. The sky was pink with the setting sun. The adhan echoed gently through the narrow stone alleys. People walked slowly toward the masjid, their shadows stretching long across cobblestone streets. Inside a small bookshop just beside the masjid gate, a tall man with graying hair adjusted the Arabic titles on a wooden shelf. A child entered the shop. "Excuse me, sir," she said in Turkish. "Do you have the Qur'an in English?" The man turned, smiling. It was Jonathan. Of course, he said. It changed my life. He handed her a copy, worn at the edges, just like the one Fatima had once given him. On the counter sat a photo in a silver frame, him and Fatima in front of Columbia University, smiling side by side. The caption read, "From interrogation to illumination." Outside, the call to prayer finished. Jonathan stepped out of the shop, placed his shoes on the rack, and entered the masjid. And as he bowed his head in sujud, a man who had once lived by secrets was now living by surrender. He was trained to detect lies, but he wasn't ready for the truth of a child's faith. This is the legacy of Islam, where logic bows to light, and hearts return home. Today, a 9-year-old Muslim girl, who hasn't just memorized the Qur'an, but carries its light in her heart. And in front of her stands a 25-year-old American student, bold, intelligent, and questioning the very existence of God. Both are on the same stage. But this is not just a conversation. It's a confrontation of worlds. This is not a lecture. This is a debate, where faith and doubt face each other head-on. And every question isn't just curiosity. It could change someone's destiny. This is Legacy of Islam, where silence becomes an answer, and truth shines without force. Asterisk. The lights dimmed, and a gentle hush swept across the grand hall of the Jakarta International Convention Center. Hundreds had gathered, students, scholars, religious leaders, and thinkers from around the globe. Each one leaned forward in quiet anticipation. This wasn't just another interfaith discussion. No, this was something different. Something unforgettable. The stage was simple. No extravagant lighting. No giant screens. Just 2 microphones, a podium in the center, and a deep navy blue backdrop embroidered with elegant golden Arabic calligraphy that shimmered under the spotlight. It read, "And say, truth has come, and falsehood has vanished." Quran 17 hours 81 minutes. On the left side of the stage stood Stephanie Louise, a 25-year-old sociology graduate from California. Her posture was confident. She wore a sleeveless top with fitted jeans, her attire casual, but her presence intense. Her sharp hazel eyes scanned the room, taking in the size of the audience. She had spoken at major campuses across America, challenged the faith of many, and never backed down from a confrontation. She was here on invitation, but she carried a mission, to challenge Islam with every ounce of her intellect. On the right stood a figure many underestimated at first glance. Fatima Zahra, only 9 years old. Her frame was tiny, barely reaching the mic. But her white hijab was spotless, and her light blue dress flowed gracefully around her. Her face was soft, but her eyes, they carried certainty. Not the kind that came from arrogance, but from depth, from belief. Fatima had memorized the entire Qur'an. But today, she wasn't here as a reciter. She stood not to repeat verses, but to speak truth. The moderator, a middle-aged academic in a gray suit, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice echoing slightly, "welcome to this historic interfaith debate. Today, we ask a question that resonates deeply across the modern world. Does Islam truly offer peace, or is it a system of restrictions hiding behind spirituality?" He gestured towards Stephanie. "You may begin." Stephanie walked slowly to the microphone. Her heels tapped lightly on the wooden floor. She took a breath, then spoke, her American accent crisp and clear. "First, thank you for having me," she said, nodding politely to the audience. "I've studied religion. Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, even parts of the Qur'an. And wherever I look in Islam, I see rules. I see boundaries. I see restrictions." She turned her gaze toward Fatima. "I want to ask something very direct," she said. "Why should any woman be told what to wear? Why is it acceptable to judge someone for not covering her head with a piece of cloth? Why does Islam equate modesty with morality? Isn't morality supposed to come from within, not from what fabric you wear? A soft wave of murmurs moved through the audience. Some nodded in agreement. Others leaned in with curiosity. A few stole glances at Fatima, unsure how a child would respond to a question so layered. But Fatima showed no nervousness. No fear. She adjusted the mic with her small hands and spoke. "Thank you, Stefani," she began, her voice soft, melodic, but steady. "You asked why Islam values modesty. The answer is simple. Islam teaches us to value the inside of a person more than the outside. The hijab isn't about oppression. It's about protection. It tells the world, see me for my mind, not my body. Respect me for my heart, not my curves." Her tone remained calm, but her words carried weight. "We cover what is precious," she continued, "not because we are ashamed of it, but because we honor it. A diamond isn't left on the street. It's kept safe. Allah tells us we are valuable. The hijab reminds us of that." Stefani tilted her head, a slight frown forming. "But how is that freedom?" she challenged. "Isn't freedom the right to decide for yourself? To define your own value?" Fatima nodded gently. "True freedom," she replied, "is not doing whatever we want. That leads to chaos. True freedom is recognizing what's right, and choosing it even when it's hard." The audience leaned in. Some began to scribble notes. Others simply stared, captivated by the back and forth. Stefani stepped forward again. "If Islam is really a religion of peace," she said, "then why do I see so much unrest in Muslim countries? So many punishments. So many rules. Peace is supposed to feel light. Islam feels heavy." Fatima didn't flinch. "Peace," she said, "is not the absence of rules. It's the presence of purpose." She paused, then asked the audience. "Imagine a road with no signs. No traffic lights. No lanes. Everyone driving however they want. Would that feel like freedom or danger?" Several heads nodded slowly in agreement. "Islam's teachings," she said, "are like those traffic rules. Not there to imprison us, but to protect us. To guide us safely." There was no applause. But the silence was even louder. The moderator stepped forward. "We will now take a short break before moving into round 2, spirituality and the nature of the soul." The lights dimmed gently. Fatima returned to her seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Stefani drank water, her eyes no longer sharp, just thoughtful. Two women. One with questions. The other with answers rooted in revelation. But the real debate had only just begun. The atmosphere in the grand hall had shifted. As the second session began, there was a hush among the crowd. No more casual whispers. No phones glowing. Just eyes fixed on the stage. Something had changed in the room. This was no longer a performance. It had become personal. The moderator returned, now speaking slower, as if respecting the weight of what had just transpired. "We now begin the second round," he announced. "Topic: Spirituality and the nature of the soul." He looked to Stefani. "You may begin." Stefani rose more slowly this time. The playful glint in her eye had dimmed, not because she'd lost confidence, but because she was now taking her opponent seriously. Or perhaps, she was starting to question if it was really an opponent she was facing, or something else altogether. Facing the audience, she began. "In my university studies," she said, "I explored psychology, neuroscience, philosophy. I've read about consciousness, the mind, identity. But no matter how advanced science becomes, one mystery remains." She paused. "The soul." A few quiet gasps passed through the audience. "No scientist can measure it. No scan can detect it. So here's my question." She turned slightly toward Fatima. Why do you, as a Muslim, believe in something you cannot see, cannot measure, cannot prove? There it was. The question no lab had ever answered, and one that many faiths had struggled to defend. Fatima stood slowly. Her movements were calm, her gaze warm. And when she spoke, her voice was gentle, but unshakable. Stefani, she said, you're right. The soul isn't something we can put under a microscope. But not everything real can be seen. She turned to the audience. Can you see the wind? She asked. No. But you feel its touch. You see its effect on the trees, on the waves. Can you see love? Or sadness? Yet entire lives are built and broken because of them. A few heads nodded silently. The soul, she continued, is what makes us human. It's what makes us feel in ways no animal or machine ever could. It's not just belief. It's experience. Then she looked back to Stefani, a small smile forming. Have you ever had a dream? She asked. That felt more real than real life? Or felt like you left your body? Stefani blinked, caught slightly off guard. Yes, she admitted. Once or twice. Fatima nodded. That's the soul, she said. Islam teaches us that during sleep, our souls are lifted from our bodies. Not fully, but enough to drift. And by God's mercy, they return in the morning. A deep silence spread across the hall. You asked for proof, Fatima said. Sometimes the strongest proof is what we all feel, but never stop to question. She paused. Have you ever sat in total silence, and suddenly felt like something inside you was missing? That emptiness, that longing, isn't your brain. That's your soul whispering, searching for the one who created it. Stefani folded her arms, her expression thoughtful but reserved. So if the soul exists, she said, why do people experience it so differently? Some people never feel it. Some say they feel nothing. Fatima responded softly. Because some hearts are open. Others are covered. Covered by noise. By distractions. By pain. But when life gets quiet, when suffering strips everything else away, the soul speaks. She took a breath, then added, have you ever cried alone, Stefani, without knowing why? Stefani hesitated, then nodded. That's your soul, Fatima said, remembering where it came from. Stefani lowered her arms. Her posture had changed. Her voice too. If that's true, where does the soul go when we die? Fatima's answer was immediate. It returns to the one who gave it. The crowd remained completely still. Even the moderator didn't move. Stefani stood in silence, lips pressed tightly together. Her next question came with a deeper tone. If souls come from God, and they're so sacred, then why do some people live such painful lives? Abused. Abandoned. Starving. If life is a test, it feels like some people start already broken. It wasn't just a challenge. It was a cry. Fatima took a step forward. Her eyes softened, and she spoke slower. I don't have all the answers, she said. But I know this. Life isn't always fair. But Allah is. She paused, letting the silence breathe. This world, it's not the final home. It's a test. Some people are tested with wealth. Others with poverty. Some with health. Others with pain. But every soul is given exactly what it needs to reach its destination, if it listens. She looked at the audience. You ask why suffering exists. Sometimes those who suffer become the strongest believers. Because they've already tasted what this world is really like, and they choose to hope anyway. Stefani looked up at her. Her voice was quieter now. But what if someone feels nothing? No belief. No connection. Just emptiness. Fatima replied. Then stop running. Just be still. And listen. She leaned forward slightly. Because the soul never forgets the truth, even when the mind does. The moderator stepped in, sensing the emotional weight in the air. Before we conclude this round, he said, one final question. He turned to Stefani. Would you like to ask Fatima one more question on this topic? Stefani nodded slowly. Yes. Just one. She stepped toward the mic. If the soul is so sacred, so connected to God, why do some people die so horribly? In war. In pain. In loneliness. What kind of mercy is that? The room grew heavy again. Fatima didn't rush to answer. She looked down, then slowly raised her eyes. Stefani, she said, I won't pretend to have a perfect answer for that pain. But I do know that every soul is held by Allah. Every tear is counted. Every cry is heard. She took a deep breath. Sometimes we don't see the mercy until much later. And sometimes we won't see it until the next life. But it's there. Always. She added softly. Mercy doesn't always look like comfort. Sometimes it looks like strength. And healing. And doors opening that we didn't know we needed. Stefani stared at the floor for a long moment. She didn't reply. But she didn't challenge either. The moderator stepped forward again. We'll now move to round 3, morality and law in Islam. The lights dimmed once more. But this time, the silence was thicker than before. No one moved. No one whispered. Because the debate was no longer about theology. It had become something else. A conversation between the mind and the soul. The hall was quiet now. Not just in sound, but in spirit. The audience, once curious and restless, now sat in complete stillness. Each round of the debate felt less like a challenge and more like a journey. Something was unfolding, not just in words but in hearts. As the lights rose again for the next session, a subtle warmth returned to the stage. It wasn't bright. Just enough to bring focus to the two women now seated across from one another, two minds that had clashed, and yet, listened. The moderator stepped forward with a softer tone. We now enter round 3, he said. A topic that shapes much of today's perception of Islam, morality and law. In a world that champions individual freedom, how does Islam's moral structure respond? He looked at Stefani. You may begin. Stefani stood, this time with no sarcasm. No smirk. Her earlier defiance had been replaced by something deeper, curiosity laced with resistance. She took a small breath and stepped toward the mic. I'll be honest, she began. Where I come from, freedom is sacred. The freedom to speak, to choose, to love. That's what I was raised to believe. She glanced at Fatima. But when I look at Islam, I don't see freedom. I see rules. I see prayer schedules. I see fasting for a month. I see dress codes. No dating. No alcohol. Even rules about how to sleep or eat. She leaned slightly forward. How is that not control? Fatima stood slowly, her expression unchanged. No sign of offense. No flinch. Just that same calm. Stefani, she began. Can I ask you something first? Stefani hesitated, then nodded. What's the hardest prison a person can be in? Stefani blinked, thrown off by the question. I guess, a prison without freedom. Fatima nodded. Yes. But the hardest prison is not one with walls. It's being a slave to your own desires. The crowd shifted slightly. Some leaned in again. To want everything. To chase everything. To try everything, and still feel empty. Fatima continued, her voice steady. Islam doesn't restrict us to punish us. It guides us to protect us. It doesn't chain us. It frees us from ourselves. Stefani raised an eyebrow. But shouldn't we define our own paths? Isn't that what makes life meaningful? Fatima gave a small smile. Imagine this, she said. You're in a forest. No map. No signposts. Just trees, shadows, and paths in every direction. It feels exciting at first, but soon you're lost. Every turn feels right and wrong. She paused. Now imagine someone gives you a map. Not to control you, but to help you reach the destination safely. That's Islam. Not a cage. A compass. Stefani folded her arms. But maps don't tell you how to sleep or dress. Fatima gently countered. Don't they? Survival maps tell you what to eat in the wild. What to avoid. How to stay warm. Even how to sleep safely. Islam's details, she added, aren't chains. They're signs. Signs from the one who made us. Stefani stepped closer to the mic. But if someone doesn't follow all these signs, what then? Are they doomed? Fatima shook her head. No one is perfect. That's why we pray. That's why we ask for forgiveness. Islam isn't a religion of punishment. It's a religion of return. As long as you're breathing, it's never too late to come back. She looked directly at Stefani. You see rules. I see mercy. You see boundaries. I see protection. She turned slightly to the audience. Those 5 prayers a day? They protect our time. Fasting? It teaches discipline and empathy. Modesty? It protects our dignity. No drinking? It protects our judgment. No premarital relationships? It protects hearts from breaking. The moderator leaned forward. Would either of you like to ask a direct question to the other? Fatima turned slightly. Stefani, she said, can I ask you something personal? Stefani nodded. Have you ever done something that you thought would make you happy, but afterward you felt emptier than before? Stefani blinked slowly. Yes, she admitted. More than once. Fatima didn't respond with argument, just understanding. That's the difference, she said. Islam doesn't promise you momentary pleasure. It offers long-term peace. Not a quick high, but a steady calm. Stefani paused. Her shoulders relaxed a little. I get that, she said. But why so many details? Why so much structure? Can't people figure it out on their own? Fatima's reply was soft. If we could, the world would look different. She continued. Without rules, people create their own. And often, those rules shift. With mood. With fashion. With pressure. She looked at the audience again. But truth doesn't change with time. Morality doesn't evolve like trends. The Creator gave us guidelines, not to confine us, but to remind us of who we are and what we're here for. Stefani looked down for a moment. You say all this, she said slowly, and yet, I know people who follow no religion at all, yet they're kind, loving, peaceful. So do they need religion to be good? Fatima nodded thoughtfully. There are good people everywhere, she said. But being good is not the same as being guided. The crowd murmured again. Some wrote that down. Goodness, Fatima continued, can come from upbringing, culture, even habit. But guidance comes from above. It doesn't just tell us what's good, it tells us why. Stefani gave a faint smile, not mocking, just acknowledging. You speak like someone much older, she said. Fatima smiled gently. The truth doesn't need age, she replied. Only sincerity. The moderator stepped forward once again. We'll close this round with one final question. He gestured to the audience. A hand rose in the middle row. A young man in a university sweatshirt stood. I have a question for both, he said. Can someone live a free, moral, happy life without religion? Fatima looked at Stefani, offering the first answer to her. Stefani spoke slowly. I used to believe yes, she said. That morality was human-made. That happiness was a choice. That freedom was sacred. She looked down, then up again. But lately, I don't know. She turned to Fatima. There's something about her calm that I've never felt. And I've tried everything. Fatima stepped forward. Yes, she said. People can feel happy without religion. For a while. But lasting peace, lasting clarity, comes from knowing your Creator. She looked gently at the man. And knowing why you were created. There was no rebuttal. The audience remained quiet, processing. The moderator nodded. Thank you both. We will now take a short break before we move to round 4, suffering and the existence of God. As the lights dimmed again, Stefani walked slowly back to her seat. Fatima sat quietly, her hands folded, her eyes lowered in silent reflection. There was no applause. Only stillness. And stillness often speaks louder than sound. The lights dimmed gently once again, and the atmosphere in the hall became heavier than ever before. The audience was no longer just observing a debate. They were absorbing a transformation, one that was slow, deep, and silent. Stefani's posture had changed completely. No longer rigid, no longer defensive. Her shoulders were slightly slouched, as if something heavy had settled in her chest. Fatima, on the other hand, sat still, her hands gently folded in her lap, her gaze soft but unwavering. The moderator walked to the center of the stage. His voice was almost a whisper. We now begin round 4, he said. A question that echoes through every heart, believer or skeptic alike. If God exists, why is there so much suffering in the world? He turned to Stefani. You may begin. She stood slowly. Her steps to the microphone were quieter than before. Her tone had changed completely, no longer sharp, no longer academic. It was human. And vulnerable. When I was 12, she began. My neighbor lost her husband in a car accident. She had 3 small children. No job. No support. And yet, every day she prayed. She paused. She believed in God. And I watched her starve, suffer, struggle, while still thanking Him. Her throat tightened. I couldn't understand it. If there's a God, and if He's loving, why would He let someone like her go through that? The audience was silent. I've seen reports of war zones, bombed schools, orphans digging for food, children who don't even know what peace feels like. And every time, I ask the same question. She turned to Fatima. If God is truly merciful, truly all-powerful, why doesn't He stop it? There was no defiance in her tone. Just pain. Deep, aching pain. Fatima stood quietly. She didn't rush her answer. She just looked at Stefani, her own face softening. I'm sorry for what you saw, she said gently. I really am. She paused, letting the weight of that moment breathe. And I won't pretend to give you a perfect answer. Because pain is never simple. She took a breath. But some truths aren't meant to erase the pain. They're meant to carry us through it. She looked at Stefani directly. You asked why suffering exists? Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who became stronger after they went through pain? Stefani nodded slowly. Yes. Have you ever seen someone who became more kind, more empathetic, because they lost something? Yes, she said again. Fatima's voice grew firmer. Then maybe the real question isn't why pain exists, but what pain creates inside us. She turned slightly toward the crowd. If life were perfect, if every day was easy, every road smooth, every wish granted, would we ever grow? Would we ever reflect? Would we ever reach for something beyond ourselves? She let that hang in the air. Fire burns, but it also purifies. Storms destroy, but they also cleanse. Darkness frightens us, but without it, we'd never see the stars. Stefani stood still. Her arms weren't folded anymore. She wasn't preparing for a rebuttal. She was listening. But, she said softly, if God is all-powerful, can't He teach us in a less painful way? Fatima nodded. He could. But would we listen? The audience stirred again. We only search when we feel loss. We only cry out when the world goes silent. God doesn't delight in our pain. But He uses it. Not to break us. But to remake us. She stepped forward slightly. Some of the most faithful people are those who've lost everything. Because in the ruins, they found the only thing that can't be taken away, faith. Stefani looked down, then whispered something unexpected. Have you ever suffered? The question wasn't in the script. Fatima blinked. Then smiled, not with pride, but with depth. Yes, she said softly. Not in the way others might. But yes. She looked down for a moment, then continued. I've cried at night, feeling alone. I've been mocked for my hijab. I've watched my parents struggle in ways I couldn't fix. I've been called strange. And too serious. Even at school. She looked up again. But I also saw how my parents turned to God, not away from Him. I saw how prayer gave them peace when nothing else could. And I learned that when life pulls you to your knees, that's the best position to pray. The room went still. Not a cough. Not a movement. Just stillness. The moderator stepped forward, his voice low. We have time for one final question in this round. He turned to the audience. An older woman stood near the back. She didn't wait for a mic. I'm not part of either side, she said, her voice trembling. But I want to ask something. The moderator nodded. The woman's hands shook slightly as she spoke. If God is merciful, then why are some prayers never answered? A murmur moved through the room. It was a question many had asked in silence. Tonight, it had found a voice. Fatima looked at the woman with gentle eyes. Because sometimes, silence is an answer. She let the words linger. Sometimes God says, not yet. Sometimes He says, I have something better. And sometimes, He says, I'm protecting you from something you can't see. The woman's eyes filled with tears. No prayer is wasted, Fatima continued. Even if the world stays the same after it, you are changed. The woman nodded slowly, whispering, Thank you, before sitting down. The moderator stepped forward again. That concludes round 4. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. As the lights dimmed for a short break, Stefani returned to her seat quietly. Her eyes didn't wander. Her hands were clasped. Her chest rose with slow, controlled breaths. Fatima sat beside her in silence. Not watching. Not waiting. Just being present. And something had shifted again. But this time, not in the room. In Stefani. She wasn't just debating anymore. She was searching. The moderator stepped up once again, slower than before. Our final round, he said, asks the question that stands above all others. A simple question, but the hardest one of all. What if this is the truth? The room held its breath. No one looked away. And both women slowly stood. The lights didn't rise fully this time. They glowed just enough to keep the stage visible, just enough to illuminate the quiet intensity between two figures now standing side by side. Fatima Zahra, the young Hafiza in white. And Stefani Louise, the American skeptic who had come to challenge, but now stood uncertain. The moderator's voice was almost a whisper now. As though anything louder would break the fragile energy in the room. This is our final round, he said. It begins with a question. Perhaps the most difficult of all. He paused and then. What if this is the truth? Silence. Not a single cough. Not a shift in a chair. The entire hall was frozen in collective stillness. Then, Stefani stepped forward. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was quiet. Measured. Every word felt like it was being pulled from somewhere deep within. When I came here, she said, I thought I'd outsmart a child. I thought I'd expose contradictions, raise difficult questions, prove that Islam, like all religions, was just another outdated system of control. She looked at Fatima, then at the audience. But something happened. She hesitated. Her throat tightened. I found someone who wasn't trying to win an argument, but someone trying to share peace. She looked down, her lips trembling slightly. And now, I don't know what I believe. Her voice cracked on the last word. I still have doubts, she said. Still have questions. But I've seen something here that I can't explain. A calm that I don't have. A strength that doesn't come from age or experience. A clarity that doesn't come from books. She turned to Fatima, her eyes glistening. What if everything you said is true? Fatima stepped forward, slowly. There's nothing wrong with questions, she said gently. But sometimes, the answers don't come from logic. They come from surrender. Stefani took a step closer. But how do I know this is the truth? There are so many religions. So many claims. How can I be sure? Fatima didn't blink. You already are. Stefani frowned slightly. What do you mean? You're not arguing anymore, Fatima replied. You're not mocking. You're searching. That's how it begins. She added softly. Truth doesn't scream. It whispers. And your heart is starting to hear it. The audience remained frozen, watching, listening. Stefani took a shaky breath. I feel like I'm standing at a door. One part of me wants to knock. The other part is afraid. Fatima nodded. I was afraid, too, the first time I stood up for my faith. But I found, when you take one step toward God, He runs toward you. Stefani's eyes brimmed with tears. Her lips moved but no words came. Fatima reached out her hand. You don't need to have all the answers today, she said. You just have to admit, this might be the answer you've been searching for. Stefani's hands trembled. I've spent years thinking religion was chains, she said, voice shaking. But now, I feel like I've been the one in chains. Chained to noise. To doubt. To emptiness. She looked down. I want what you have, she whispered. That calm. That connection. That light. Fatima didn't say anything. She just extended her hand further. Then say the words. Stefani looked at her. Her entire body trembled. Her breathing quickened. I'm scared, she said. Fatima smiled gently. That's okay. And then, a silence. A silence so deep, it echoed louder than any applause. Until finally, Stefani raised her eyes. Took a breath. And in a voice that trembled, but carried conviction, she said, I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. The room held its breath. And I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. A tear fell down her cheek. There was no wild cheering. No clapping. Just stillness. And then, one by one, people stood. Quietly. Reverently. Some placed hands over their hearts. Others closed their eyes. A few wiped away tears. Fatima stepped forward and gently embraced Stefani. It wasn't dramatic. It was human. It was real. The moderator stood back, blinking rapidly, his voice thick with emotion. Today, he said, we did not just witness a debate. He looked at the two figures on stage. We witnessed a soul return home. The hall stood in silence, not out of formality, but out of respect. Respect for something that went beyond argument, beyond intellect, beyond words. Later that night, long after the crowd had left, and the lights had dimmed, Stefani sat quietly in the masjid's prayer room. Her head was now covered with a simple scarf. Her hands rested on her knees. Her eyes closed. Fatima sat beside her, quietly reading a small Qur'an. For a long time, Stefani said nothing. She just breathed. Then finally she whispered, "You know, I still don't know everything." Fatima smiled gently, without looking up. "None of us do. I still have so much to learn," Stefani added. "I don't even know how to pray yet." Fatima closed her Quran and turned to her. "You have time," she said softly. "Islam isn't a race. It's a journey." Stefani nodded slowly. "I feel like a door has opened inside me." "It has," Fatima replied. "And what comes next?" Stefani asked. Fatima smiled and placed her hand over her heart. "Now you walk through it." And with that, the final chapter of the debate closed, not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. Because sometimes, it's not the loudest voice that wins. Sometimes, it's the one that whispers, and is finally heard.